They're all here. The whisper slid through the conference room like a blade. Board members, department heads, legal counsel, even reporters. No one looked at me with curiosity anymore. Only contempt. At the center of the room, beneath the museum's century-old stained glass ceiling, the shattered fragments of the Dawn of Kings rested inside a glass evidence case. The painting had survived wars, fires, and generations of collectors. According to everyone present, I had destroyed it. Chairwoman Evelyn Brooks folded her hands on the polished oak table. Adrian. Her voice remained calm, polished, practiced. You've worked here for 12 years. She paused long enough for every camera to focus on me. We trusted you. A wave of murmurs swept across the room. Someone behind me whispered loudly enough to be heard. 12 years, what a waste. Another laughed. I always thought he acted too proud. I kept my eyes on the evidence case. The painting wasn't destroyed. Not really. Only someone who had never restored oil paintings would believe otherwise. That thought stayed inside my head. I said nothing. Evelyn slid a thick folder across the table. The investigation concludes that your unauthorized chemical treatment caused irreversible damage. Her lawyer pushed another document beside it. A resignation agreement. Silence. Everyone waited for me to argue, to panic, to beg. My assistant, Mia, lowered her eyes. She couldn't even look at me. Marcus Hale, the deputy director, leaned back with folded arms. There isn't much left to discuss. He sounded almost disappointed. As professionals, he continued, we should preserve the museum's dignity. His version of dignity meant sacrificing one person before the sponsors started asking questions. I had expected nothing less. A reporter raised a hand. Mr. Carter, do you deny the allegations? Every eye settled on me. Even the security guards stopped moving. I looked at the resignation papers. Neatly prepared. Already signed by legal. Prepared before this meeting even began. So that was their plan. No investigation. Only a conclusion. I reached for the pen. Someone gasped. Marcus smiled. I knew he'd do the responsible thing. Responsible. Interesting choice of word. I signed. One clean signature. No hesitation. No defense. No explanation. I pushed the folder back. I'm done. That was all. The room froze. Evelyn frowned. That's it. I nodded once. That's it. No statement. No. You aren't denying anything? I met her eyes. No. Confusion rippled across several faces. This wasn't the reaction they had rehearsed. Marcus leaned forward. So you admit your guilt. I admitted nothing. Then why resign? I stood. Because you already decided what you wanted to believe. My chair slid quietly backward. I buttoned my coat. Mia suddenly whispered. Adrian. For the first time, emotion cracked through her voice. She couldn't finish. Neither could I. Not because I was angry. Because I was tired. Very, very tired. 12 years. Countless nights sleeping inside restoration labs. Missed birthdays. Missed funerals. Canceled vacations. Every emergency. Every impossible deadline. Every masterpiece everyone else had declared hopeless. I restored them all. Not for applause. Because history deserved honesty. Yet today, no one asked how the damage actually happened. Only who should carry the blame. I walked toward the door. Marcus called after me. Don't worry. His smile widened. We'll recover. I paused without turning around. I'm sure you believe that. Then I left. No one followed. Outside, rain covered the museum steps in silver. My employee badge no longer unlocked the front gate. Security disabled it before the meeting ended. Efficient. I slipped the badge into the guard's hand. He looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. He swallowed hard. You really did it? I looked back at the museum. The enormous banners fluttered in the wind. Preserving history for the future. A beautiful slogan. I almost smiled. The truth, I said quietly, doesn't disappear just because people stop looking for it. He stared after me. I walked away without an umbrella. Behind me, the museum doors closed. For the first time in 12 years. They were no longer my responsibility. But inside my briefcase rested something no one had asked about. Not a confession. Not an appeal. A sealed drive. Untouched. Patient. Waiting. The apartment felt strangely silent. Not peaceful. Empty. I placed my briefcase on the dining table, and loosened my tie without turning on the lights. Rain tapped softly against the windows. For years, I had come home carrying the smell of varnish, old canvas, and solvents. Tonight there was only damp wool and exhaustion. My phone vibrated. Marcus. I let it ring. Then Evelyn. Ignored. Legal department. Ignored. The calls continued until the screen finally went dark. I made tea instead. Routine had always steadied my hands. While the kettle heated, I unlocked the briefcase. Inside lay the encrypted storage drive. A small black rectangle. Ordinary. Dangerous. I turned it over between my fingers. Months ago, after several expensive artifacts began arriving with suspicious restoration requests, something had started bothering me. The paperwork never matched. Chemical inventories disappeared. Security footage occasionally developed convenient corruptions. Too many coincidences. I never accused anyone. Instead, I quietly built my own archive. Every restoration stage was photographed. Every chemical batch logged. Every conservation room recorded through independent environmental sensors that stored encrypted timestamps. Not because I expected gratitude. Because restoration depended on evidence. Evidence had a habit of surviving people. The kettle whistled. Before I poured the water, someone knocked. 3 measured taps. I already knew who it was. When I opened the door, Mia stood there soaked from the rain. Her mascara had blurred. You wouldn't answer. I know. She looked at me as if seeing a stranger. Why didn't you defend yourself? I stepped aside. She entered silently. The apartment smelled faintly of old books. She looked around. So this is where you disappeared every weekend. I preferred quiet. She laughed bitterly. They destroyed your career. I know. And you're making tea. I was thirsty. She stared at me in disbelief. Finally, she whispered, I thought you'd fight. I handed her a towel. I spent 12 years fighting. For them. For the paintings. She sank into a chair. I testified against you. I know. Her head snapped up. You knew? I read the witness list yesterday. You still didn't stop me? What would be the point? Tears welled in her eyes. They pressured everyone. I know. They said the donors would leave. I know. They said someone had to take responsibility. I nodded once. They weren't wrong. Her voice shook. But not you. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she noticed the drive on the table. What's that? The reason I didn't argue. She frowned. I plugged the drive into my laptop. Folders filled the screen. Dates. Laboratory reports. Environmental logs. Raw surveillance backups. Independent sensor records. Thousands of files. Mia leaned closer. What is all this? Insurance. For yourself? For the truth. I opened one recording. The conservation studio. 3 weeks earlier. Timestamp verified. Marcus entered after midnight. He wasn't alone. A private art dealer followed him. The dealer unrolled the original masterpiece. Marcus replaced it with another canvas. An imitation. Excellent. But still an imitation. Mia covered her mouth. No. I played the next recording. Chemical alterations. Forgery adjustments. Document swaps. False inventory entries. Every movement automatically timestamped by equipment no one knew existed. Her breathing became uneven. They switched the painting. Before the exhibition. So the one that was damaged was already a counterfeit. She looked physically ill. Then why let them blame you? I closed the laptop. Because they never intended to find the truth. She whispered. They'll be arrested. Eventually. You could release this tonight. I could. But you won't. I looked out the rain-covered window. No. Why? Because desperate people make mistakes. She didn't understand. Not yet. When guilty people believed they had already won, they became careless. Phones were called. Evidence disappeared. Money moved. Accomplices contacted each other. Every cover-up left new footprints. I'd spent 12 years restoring damaged paintings. Tonight, I would simply wait while damaged people restored nothing at all. My phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't Marcus. Unknown number. I answered. A calm male voice spoke. Mr. Carter. Who's calling? I'm with the National Heritage Integrity Office. My fingers tightened slightly around the phone. We'd like to ask about several inconsistencies involving your museum. I remained silent. The voice continued. And before you answer, a brief pause. We already know you didn't damage that painting. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, the tea had gone cold. I did not answer immediately. The voice on the phone waited with unusual patience. Mr. Carter? Yes. My name is Daniel Reeves, Senior Investigator, National Heritage Integrity Office. His tone carried none of the hesitation I had heard all day. No accusation. No sympathy. Only certainty. You said, I replied carefully, that you already know I didn't damage the painting. We do. Mia looked at me, her eyes widening. How? Because your museum isn't the only institution under investigation. The room became very quiet. Daniel continued. May we meet tonight? I glanced at the rain outside. Come over. 40 minutes later, 3 people stepped into my apartment. Daniel Reeves, a forensic accountant, a digital evidence specialist. No uniforms. No dramatic introductions. Daniel placed an official identification card on the table before sitting down. We apologize for the timing. You're late by about 6 months. He accepted the criticism without protest. You're right. That answer surprised me. Most officials preferred excuses. He preferred facts. We've been tracking a network involved in replacing priceless artwork with high-quality counterfeits. Mia inhaled sharply. Daniel continued. Different museums. Different cities. Different directors. The pattern repeats. I folded my arms. And Marcus? We believe he's only one piece. Evelyn? We don't know yet. That answer mattered. Too many investigations destroyed innocent people together with guilty ones. I won't accuse someone without proof, I said. Daniel nodded. Neither will we. I slid the encrypted drive across the table. This contains independent restoration logs, environmental records, and surveillance copies. The digital specialist immediately stopped. You made independent backups? Yes. How? The museum trusted its own server. I didn't. For the first time, Daniel smiled. I've wanted to meet whoever built this archive. He plugged the drive into an isolated forensic laptop. Minutes passed in silence. Folders opened. Metadata appeared. Verification reports. Digital signatures. Timestamp chains. The specialist suddenly looked up. This is... He stopped himself. Incredible. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What? Nothing has been altered. Are you certain? 100%. He looked at me. This archive would survive court. I leaned back. That was the idea. Daniel closed the laptop. You've just changed our entire investigation. No. I shook my head. I simply stopped protecting people who never deserved it. The next morning, the museum opened as usual. At least on the surface. News websites continued publishing my photograph. Disgraced conservator resigns. Expert admits responsibility. Career ends in scandal. Comment sections were merciless. Fraud. Attention seeker. Destroyer. Someone even wrote, he should never work around art again. I read every comment. Then closed the page. Words only mattered when spoken by people whose judgment I respected. These weren't those people. Meanwhile, inside the museum, Marcus walked through the restoration wing with new confidence. Employees fell silent whenever he appeared. He interpreted that silence as respect. It wasn't. Fear often looked identical. Mia still had access to internal messaging systems. She wasn't spying. She simply forwarded documents she was legally entitled to receive. One message caught my attention. Emergency executive meeting. Attendance mandatory. No agenda. No explanation. Interesting. They were nervous. Exactly as expected. At noon my phone buzzed. Not Marcus. Not Evelyn. A number I had deleted months ago. My younger brother. Ethan. I answered after the 4th ring. So, he laughed awkwardly. I heard. News travels fast. You should have called me. I didn't think you'd believe me. Silence. That's fair. We hadn't spoken properly in almost 3 years. Not because we hated each other. Because life had become crowded with misunderstandings. I saw the news, he said quietly. It didn't sound like you. It wasn't. Another pause. You need somewhere to stay? I still have my apartment. You know what I mean. I smiled despite myself. I know. You're still family. Simple words. Honest words. They carried more weight than every speech delivered in yesterday's boardroom. Thank you. You don't sound angry. I was. And now? Now I'm finished being useful to people who only valued my usefulness. Ethan laughed softly. That sounds more like my brother. Across town. Inside the museum. Panic had begun. Marcus slammed a report onto the conference table. Who contacted Heritage Integrity? Nobody answered. Evelyn looked exhausted. We don't know anyone contacted them. They're asking questions. So answer them. They're asking about inventory dating back 5 years. That shouldn't be a problem. Marcus stared at her. Unless those inventories contain things no one else knew. His jaw tightened. I'll handle it. You've said that before. The room froze. It was the first time Evelyn had openly challenged him. Something had shifted. Very slightly. But enough. Marcus forced another smile. We simply need everyone united. No one responded. Unity built on fear rarely survived pressure. That evening Daniel called again. We executed 3 search warrants. So quickly. Your archive gave us probable cause. And they were already destroying documents. I closed my eyes briefly. Right on schedule. Daniel continued. We recovered shredded accounting records. Too late. No. The forensic team reconstructed most of them. And Marcus? He requested emergency access to storage vaults after your resignation. Exactly. He believed I had surrendered. So he hurried. Desperate people always move too fast. 3 days passed. I did nothing. That was the hardest part. Not acting. Not correcting lies. Not defending myself. Simply waiting. People mistook silence for weakness. Sometimes silence was discipline. On the 4th morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Chairwoman Evelyn Brooks. She stood outside my apartment wearing the same tailored coat she had worn during the board meeting. Only now it looked heavier. She held no assistants. No lawyers. No confidence. When I opened the door, she spoke first. May I come in? You may. She entered slowly, studying the shelves lined with restoration journals and conservation manuals. You really lived your work. I still do. She nodded. I owe you an apology. You owe me honesty. Her shoulders lowered. I thought the investigation had been completed. It never began. She closed her eyes. I know that now. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she reached into her handbag and produced an envelope. Your resignation. I looked at it. I never accepted it. You announced it publicly. I know. You let them print headlines. Yes. You watched my career burn. Pain crossed her face. I believed Marcus. Why? He always had answers. And I only had evidence. She looked down. I failed. I didn't rush to comfort her. Failure deserved acknowledgement before forgiveness. I've already spoken to the board, she continued. We want you back. No. The answer came immediately. She looked stunned. You haven't even heard the offer. I don't need to. We'll increase your salary. No. You can lead the restoration division. No. We'll issue a public apology. I looked at her calmly. You're offering positions. She frowned. What should I be offering? Trust. Silence. It lasted long enough for the ticking wall clock to become painfully loud. You're right, she whispered. I don't know how to repair this. You don't? Then tell me. I shook my head. No. Why? Because rebuilding trust is your responsibility. She covered her eyes briefly. I deserve that. Yes. For the first time since arriving, she stopped acting like a chairwoman. She looked like a tired woman who had realized leadership required more than confidence. I've spent 30 years protecting this museum, she said quietly. And I almost destroyed the best conservator I've ever hired. You didn't. She looked confused. I walked away. The difference mattered. Victims were pushed. I had chosen to leave. That choice still belonged to me. After she left, I watched the envelope remain unopened on my table. Hours later, Daniel called again. Bad news. Marcus. He's missing. I stood immediately. When he emptied his office before dawn. And security? Several cameras were disabled. I almost laughed. That's exactly what he'd do. You expected it? Yes. Daniel sighed. I've learned to dislike that answer. You'll like the next one less. What is it? He won't run alone. Silence. Then, you think there's someone above him. I don't think. I know. How? Marcus never understood restoration. But the counterfeit replacements were technically flawless. Daniel stopped speaking. Someone else had designed the operation. Someone much more experienced. Someone still invisible. A second later, another call interrupted his. He answered. I listened without hearing the other voice. Daniel's expression changed, then hardened. When he returned, he spoke only one sentence. They just found another counterfeit. My heart sank. Which museum? The National Gallery. Different city. Same method. Same timing. The conspiracy was far larger than any of us had imagined. And somewhere, the person who truly started everything had just realized. I was no longer staying silent. The morning news no longer led with my resignation. It led with raids. Museum officials escorted through side entrances. Evidence boxes carried into government vehicles. Financial records seized. Commentators who had called me reckless 4 days earlier now spoke with careful restraint. The narrative had shifted. I had not touched it. Truth had. My phone remained almost silent. The only messages I answered came from Ethan, Mia, and Daniel. Everyone else wanted something. Forgiveness, information, access, or another chance. I offered none of them. Daniel arrived just after sunrise carrying a cardboard archive box. He placed it on my dining table. We recovered this from a storage facility Marcus rented under another name. I lifted the lid. Inside were conservation reports from museums across the country. Some were decades old. Others were only months old. Every file carried handwritten notes. Not Marcus's handwriting. Someone else's. Precise. Elegant. Clinical. The annotations didn't discuss beauty or history. Only value. Originals suitable for replacement. Minimal public detection risk. Delay authentication until ownership transfer. It wasn't the language of a curator. It was the language of an investor. I looked at Daniel. This isn't theft. No. It's inventory management. He nodded. Exactly. Whoever wrote these notes never saw paintings as cultural heritage. They saw assets. Movable numbers. Tradable commodities. I turned another page. A familiar signature stopped me cold. Not because I recognized the name. Because I recognized the handwriting. Years ago, I had seen those same elegant annotations in restoration journals left anonymously in our technical library. At the time, I had admired the author's precision. Now I understood why. He wasn't teaching restoration. He was teaching concealment. Daniel leaned forward. You know something? I know the handwriting. Who? I don't know his name. But I've met his work. By noon, we were standing inside a secured government laboratory. The counterfeit painting from the National Gallery rested beneath forensic lighting. At first glance, it was breathtaking. Even experts could have admired it. Then I noticed one detail. A microscopic brush correction beneath the lower left border. Invisible to the public. Meaningless to collectors. Impossible for me to ignore. I stepped closer. Daniel watched quietly. You've seen this before. Yes. Where? Our museum. He frowned. The original? No. The training copies. Years earlier, anonymous practice canvases had arrived for restoration workshops. No artist was credited. No institution claimed them. Every one of them contained that same microscopic correction. A signature hidden inside technique. I whispered. He's been preparing this for years. Daniel's expression darkened. Then we're chasing someone patient. Very. On the drive back, Daniel broke the silence. There's something else. What? We traced several payments. To Marcus? No. He handed me a printed spreadsheet. Consulting fees. Restoration evaluations. Private authentication contracts. The recipient appeared again and again. Northbridge Art Advisory. A company I had never heard of. Yet the payment totals reached into the millions. Who owns it? We're trying to find out. Trying. It changes directors every year. Shell companies. Layered ownership. Professional laundering. I folded the papers carefully. This wasn't built overnight. No. It took years. Which meant one thing. The conspiracy had survived because good people assumed everyone else was acting in good faith. That assumption had become its greatest protection. That evening Mia visited again. She carried a cardboard box filled with personal belongings from my former office. They finally let me collect these. She smiled sadly. I think they expected you to come running back. I didn't. I noticed. She set the box down. On top rested my old magnifying visor, a cracked coffee mug, and a faded notebook. I opened it. Every page contained restoration observations. Pigment behavior. Humidity changes. Canvas tension. Then halfway through, a folded piece of paper slipped onto the floor. Mia bent to pick it up. She froze. Adrian. What? She handed it to me. It was a visitor authorization form. 5 years old. Signed by Chairwoman Evelyn. Granting unrestricted after-hours access to Northbridge Art Advisory. Daniel looked over my shoulder. The same company. I nodded slowly. Evelyn had opened the door. Whether knowingly or not remained unanswered. I did not call Evelyn. Not yet. Evidence deserved context before confrontation. Too many lives had already been damaged by assumptions. I refused to repeat their mistake. Instead, Daniel arranged a quiet meeting with the museum's former chief archivist. Harold Bennon had retired 2 years earlier. He lived alone in a modest house overlooking a lake outside the city. When we arrived, he seemed unsurprised to see government investigators. Almost relieved. I wondered how long it would take. Daniel exchanged a glance with me. "You've been expecting us?" Harold poured tea before answering. "I've been expecting someone." His hands trembled slightly with age. Not fear. Weariness. I tried warning them. "Who?" "The board." "What happened?" "They said I was becoming paranoid." He laughed without humor. "I spent 40 years cataloging history." He looked at me. "History repeats because people ignore quiet voices." His gaze lingered. "I imagine you understand that." I did. Better than most. Harold disappeared into another room and returned carrying an old leather ledger. Unlike digital files, this book had never touched a computer. Every loan request, every private viewing, every restricted vault visit, recorded by hand. Daniel carefully turned the pages, then stopped. Northbridge Art Advisory. Again, again, again. Always approved. Always expedited. Harold pointed to a series of initials beside several entries. Those weren't Marcus. Then who? A consultant. Name? Harold hesitated. I only knew him as Mr. Vale. The name meant nothing to me, yet something about it felt deliberately incomplete. A first name? He never gave one. A photograph? Harold slowly nodded. I think. He stood and searched another cabinet. Minutes later, he returned holding an old exhibition program. A group photograph. Dozens of people. Sponsors. Curators. Consultants. I scanned every face. Then my breath caught. Standing in the back row, half hidden behind taller guests, was a man with silver hair and calm eyes. I knew that face. Not personally. Professionally. He had delivered 2 guest lectures during my early years. One of the most respected restoration experts in the country. Professor Leonard Vale. The man whose articles were cited in conservation universities across the world. The man whose technical methods I had studied. The man whose hidden brush signature appeared inside every counterfeit. Daniel quietly said, "You recognize him?" "Yes." "Are you certain?" "I wish I wasn't." That night the news exploded again. A whistleblower inside Northbridge Art Advisory had contacted authorities. Anonymous. Providing financial records. Shipping manifests. Encrypted correspondence. The investigation accelerated overnight. Marcus's photograph appeared on every major channel. Wanted for questioning. His frozen bank accounts. His abandoned apartment. His luxury vehicles. Gone. Public opinion turned with breathtaking speed. The same commentators who had demanded my disgrace now called me the key witness. I remained home. Watching. Waiting. My phone buzzed once. A single text from an unknown number. You should have stayed silent. No signature. No explanation. Just those 5 words. I read them twice. Then deleted the message. Fear had arrived. Not mine. Theirs. Someone powerful had finally realized that I had never been their greatest threat. Their greatest mistake had been believing I would keep protecting them after they chose to bury me. The first official summons arrived at 8:15 the next morning. No drama. No flashing lights. Just a sealed envelope delivered by a government courier. Inside was a single sentence. Your testimony is requested before the National Cultural Integrity Commission at 10 a.m. Daniel met me outside the commission building. The stone facade reminded me of the museum. Old. Imposing. Built to outlive the people inside it. Ready? He asked. I've been ready for years. The hearing room was filled with journalists, investigators, museum directors, and legal representatives from institutions across the country. I recognized several faces. People who had refused to answer my calls a week ago. Now they avoided my eyes. At the center of the room sat Professor Leonard Vale. His silver hair was perfectly combed. His suit impeccable. His expression calm. If someone had walked in without context, they would have mistaken him for the victim. He noticed me, then smiled. Not warmly. Professionally. As expected, he said quietly. So you're Adrian Carter. I am. I've heard remarkable things about your technical ability. You've seen it. His smile faded for a fraction of a second. Enough. He knew I had recognized his work. The commission chair called the hearing to order. Daniel presented the timeline. Financial transfers. Counterfeit discoveries. Storage facilities. Marcus's disappearance. Then my archive appeared on the large display screen. Every timestamp. Every environmental log. Every independent recording. The room grew quieter with each document. When the footage of Marcus replacing the painting played, reporters stopped typing. They simply watched. One commissioner turned toward Leonard. Professor Vale, were you aware of these activities? Absolutely not. His answer came instantly. Too instantly. Another commissioner asked, have you ever worked with Northbridge Art Advisory? Only as an independent consultant. For how long? I don't recall. Daniel placed another folder onto the evidence table. You billed Northbridge over $6 million across 11 years. Leonard glanced at the documents. No surprise. Only calculation. I advised on restoration standards. And counterfeit authentication? I reject that accusation. The hearing continued. Question after question. Answer after answer. Leonard never raised his voice. He never lost control. That made him dangerous. People trusted calm men. Sometimes they shouldn't. After 3 hours, the commission announced a short recess. Daniel found me standing near a window overlooking the city. I don't like it. What? He's too prepared. He expected an investigation. No. Daniel lowered his voice. He expected us. I looked back toward the hearing room. Leonard was speaking quietly with his attorneys. Not once had he looked worried. Because he believed we still lacked one thing. Direct proof. He had hidden behind contracts. Consulting agreements. Corporate structures. Everything legal. Everything deniable. Then my phone vibrated. Mia? I answered immediately. Adrian. Her breathing was uneven. I found something. Where are you? The museum archives. I thought they were sealed. They are. I came to pack the conservation library. What did you find? There was a false panel behind Professor Vale's donated reference cabinet. I felt my heartbeat quicken. What was inside? A notebook. She paused. I think it's his. 30 minutes later, Daniel obtained an emergency warrant. By the time we reached the museum, investigators were already removing the cabinet from the conservation library. The hidden compartment was smaller than expected. Inside rested a weathered leather journal. No lock. No encryption. Only confidence. Leonard had believed no one would ever look behind the cabinet. Daniel carefully opened the first page. Not diary entries. Recipes. Pigment formulas. Artificial aging techniques. Canvas distress simulations. Methods to imitate centuries of oxidation. Every counterfeit process documented with obsessive precision. One investigator whispered, "My God." I remained silent. Near the back of the notebook, another section appeared. Client initials. Transaction codes. Replacement schedules. Museum names. Insurance values. Profit margins. Then, the final pages. Photographs. Marcus. Private collectors. Auction representatives. And Chairwoman Evelyn Brooks. Standing beside Leonard during a fundraising dinner. Daniel looked at me. This doesn't prove she was involved. It proves they met. Exactly. The distinction mattered. Evidence first. Conclusions later. Always. The hearing resumed that afternoon. This time, the atmosphere had changed. Journalists no longer whispered. They leaned forward. Waiting. Daniel placed Leonard's notebook before the commission. I request permission to introduce newly recovered evidence. Granted. The pages appeared on the courtroom screens. One by one. Counterfeit formulas. Replacement strategies. Financial distributions. The room fell completely silent. For the first time that day, Leonard's expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. The chief commissioner adjusted his glasses. Professor Vale. Yes. Is this your handwriting? Leonard looked at the notebook for nearly 10 seconds. Long enough to understand that denial would be dangerous. It resembles mine. The commissioner did not react. Is it yours? Yes. A reporter's camera clicked loudly. Another. Then dozens more. Flash after flash illuminated the room. Leonard remained composed. I recorded restoration theories. Daniel opened to another page. Then explained this. He enlarged a handwritten sentence. Replace originals only after authentication certificate is secured. The room erupted. Leonard finally leaned forward. You misunderstand the context. Please explain it. Silence. He couldn't. Because there was no innocent explanation. Then the unexpected happened. The rear doors opened. 2 officers escorted Marcus Hale into the hearing room. He looked nothing like the confident deputy director who had mocked me days earlier. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot. His shoulders had collapsed under the weight of sleepless nights. Leonard stared at him. For the first time, real fear appeared. Marcus wasn't supposed to be here. The commissioner spoke calmly. Mr. Hale has agreed to cooperate. The room exploded with whispers. Marcus looked toward Leonard. You said. His voice cracked. You promised I'd never stand alone. Leonard closed his eyes briefly, then looked away. Marcus laughed bitterly. That's your answer? No response. After a long silence, Marcus turned toward the commission. I'll tell you everything. For 4 hours, he spoke. Every payment, every shipment, every secret storage location, every collector, every museum, every forged certificate. He confessed not because he had found courage. He confessed because the man he had sacrificed everything for had abandoned him. Consequences. Not revenge. Consequences. When Marcus finished, the room was emotionally exhausted. The commissioner looked toward me. Mr. Carter. I stood. You've been offered reinstatement by the museum. I have. Will you accept? Every camera pointed at me. Even Evelyn held her breath. I looked around the room. At the investigators who had searched for facts. At Mia, who had chosen honesty despite her fear. At Ethan, sitting quietly in the public gallery. At Evelyn, whose regret looked genuine. Finally, I answered. I won't return to the museum I left. Disappointment crossed several faces. Then I continued. But I will help build one that deserves public trust. The room became still. I don't want my old office back. I want independent conservation standards. Transparent restoration records. Mandatory evidence archives. So that no conservator is ever destroyed by convenience again. No applause followed. Only silence. The kind of silence that comes when people realize they have just heard something larger than a personal victory. Across the room, Leonard Vale lowered his head for the first time. Not because I had defeated him, because the system he had exploited was about to disappear forever. Autumn arrived quietly. The headlines disappeared first, then the television interviews, then the endless requests for exclusive stories. Public attention moved on, as it always did. The work remained. 3 weeks after the hearing, the Ministry of Culture announced the creation of the Independent Conservation Standards Council. To my surprise, my name wasn't listed as its director. It was listed as its architect. I preferred that. Titles had never interested me. Systems did. The first council meeting took place in a renovated brick warehouse overlooking the river. No marble floors. No portraits of wealthy benefactors. No velvet ropes separating executives from conservators. Just long wooden tables filled with scientists, archivists, chemists, historians, restorers, and digital forensic specialists. People who normally worked behind the scenes. People whose names never appeared beneath museum plaques. Daniel stood near the projector. Everyone here knows why we're meeting. He nodded toward me. But this framework began with Adrian. I stood slowly. Every eye followed me. Months earlier, attention like this would have made me uncomfortable. Now it simply reminded me of responsibility. I don't want a council that depends on one honest person, I said. I want one that continues working when honest people retire. Several heads nodded. I continued. Every restoration must leave a permanent evidence trail. Every chemical sample must be independently verified. No single executive should ever control both authentication and conservation. A woman from the National Library raised her hand. What about anonymous reporting? We build that in. A forensic chemist added. And automatic environmental monitoring. Mandatory. Someone else suggested rotating external audits. Another proposed public restoration reports. The conversation grew louder. Not argumentative. Constructive. For the first time in years, I wasn't defending myself. I was building something. During lunch, Mia joined me on the rooftop terrace. She carried 2 paper cups of coffee. I still keep expecting reporters to jump out from behind a wall. They've found newer scandals. She smiled. I suppose that's healthy. The river reflected the afternoon sun. Boats drifted lazily across the water. You seem different, she said. I am. In what way? I thought about the question before answering. I spent years believing that if I worked hard enough, institutions would naturally protect the truth. And now, I know institutions are only as honest as the systems inside them. She looked out over the river. I almost testified against you forever. You changed. I was afraid. I know. She lowered her eyes. You forgave me too easily. No. She looked surprised. I understood you. That's different. Her shoulders relaxed. Understanding asked less of the heart than forgiveness. It asked only for honesty. Later that afternoon, Daniel approached carrying a thin file. One last administrative matter. I accepted it. Inside was a formal notice. Professor Leonard Vale accepted a full plea agreement in exchange for identifying private collectors and international buyers. His network had stretched across 3 countries, 37 counterfeit replacements, 21 museums, hundreds of millions of dollars. The numbers hardly mattered anymore. What stayed with me was something else. A handwritten note attached to the file. From Leonard. Addressed to me. Daniel watched as I unfolded it. The handwriting was as precise as ever. You possess talent that should have been ambitious. Instead, you settled for principles. That is why you nearly lost everything. I folded the letter again. Daniel asked quietly, "Will you answer him?" "No. Aren't you curious?" I already know what he'd say. And he believes integrity is weakness. I slipped the letter back into the file. He'll never understand why he's wrong. That evening I walked home without checking whether anyone was following me. For months I had lived beneath suspicion. Now the city simply moved around me. Children chased pigeons through the square. Street musicians played beneath old stone arches. A young couple argued over directions before laughing at themselves. Ordinary life. I had almost forgotten how beautiful ordinary life could be. Winter brought the museum's reopening ceremony. The restoration galleries had been redesigned. Every conservation studio now included transparent observation windows. Visitors could watch restorers at work. Every treatment report became publicly accessible through digital archives. The slogan hanging above the entrance had changed. Not preserving history for the future. Now it read, "Truth is the first restoration." I stood outside across the street. Not invited as a guest of honor. By choice. Ethan joined me with 2 cups of hot chocolate. "You really aren't going inside?" "I've already been inside enough." He handed me a cup. "You know, Mom would have been proud." I smiled quietly. She would have corrected every speech for grammar first. He laughed. "Definitely." For a while we watched families enter the museum. Children pointed excitedly toward the dinosaur hall. Elderly couples admired the restored entrance. Life continued. Exactly as it should. Someone crossed the street toward us. Chairwoman Evelyn Brooks. No photographers accompanied her. No assistants. Just one woman carrying a small wooden box. "I hoped I'd find you here." "You did." She handed me the box. "I won't ask you to come back." I nodded. "Thank you. I finally understood what you meant." "About trust." "Yes." She smiled sadly. "I spent years protecting a building. I forgot to protect the people inside it." I accepted the box. Inside lay my old museum identification badge. Restored. Mounted beneath glass. Alongside a small brass plaque. Employee number 014. Who chose truth over convenience. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Evelyn quietly said, "I can't undo what happened." "No, but I can make sure it never happens again." I believed her. Not because she promised. Because she had changed. Real change rarely announced itself loudly. It appeared in consistent choices. Months later, the Independent Conservation Standards Council released its first national audit. Every museum participated voluntarily. Several failed. Many passed. All improved. For the first time, restorers across the country contacted one another through a shared evidence network instead of isolated departments. Knowledge became cooperation instead of competition. One evening, Mia stopped by my office. Not at the museum. At the council headquarters. She dropped a thick report onto my desk. "Guess what?" "What?" "No unresolved authentication disputes this quarter." I stared at the report, then laughed. It felt unfamiliar. Comfortable. "You know," she said, "people keep calling you the man who exposed the biggest museum fraud in history. They're wrong." "Oh, I didn't expose it." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I stopped hiding it. There was a difference. One demanded action. The other demanded restraint. Sometimes the hardest decision wasn't fighting. It was stepping aside and refusing to carry someone else's lies. Outside the office windows, snow began falling over the city. For the first time in many years, I watched it without feeling the weight of unfinished battles. Peace, I realized, wasn't something the world gave you. It was something you built by refusing to betray yourself. Spring arrived with rain. Not the violent storms that stripped branches from trees. Gentle rain. The kind that washed dust from old buildings and left the city smelling clean. I unlocked the council office before sunrise. The hallway lights flickered on one by one. For a moment, I simply stood there. Years ago, I would have reached automatically for my museum keys. That instinct was finally gone. A quiet satisfaction settled in its place. Not victory. Acceptance. At 9 o'clock, Daniel entered carrying a slim folder. I thought you'd want to see this personally. I looked at the official seal. The final judgment. He nodded. It's over. I opened the file. Marcus Hale had received a reduced sentence in exchange for complete cooperation. Every hidden storage location had been recovered. Every identified counterfeit had been replaced with the original artwork whenever possible. Professor Leonard Vale had received the longest sentence. Lifetime prohibition from working in cultural preservation. Permanent revocation of every professional credential. International blacklisting. Financial restitution. Asset seizure. His fortune had vanished almost overnight. Ironically, the man who had spent decades assigning prices to priceless things had ended with nothing that money could buy. Daniel leaned against the desk. No appeals. He knows he would lose. I think he finally understands. I closed the folder. No. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? He understands consequences. I looked toward the rain beyond the window. Understanding regret is something else. A month later, I received a handwritten request. Not from a lawyer. Not from a journalist. From Leonard himself. He wished to meet. Daniel immediately advised against it. You don't owe him anything. I know. Then why go? I thought about the question. Because I don't want the story to end with assumptions. The prison visiting room was plain. Gray walls. Metal chairs. Glass windows that reflected more than they revealed. Leonard entered wearing a simple prison uniform. Without tailored suits and polished shoes, he looked older. Smaller. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he smiled faintly. You came. You asked. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. He nodded. I deserve that. The honesty surprised me. Not because it erased anything. Because it was the first honest sentence I'd ever heard from him. You've probably imagined this conversation many times, Leonard said. I haven't. No. I've been too busy living. A tired laugh escaped him. I suppose that's another difference between us. He folded his hands. I wanted to understand something. What? You never used the archive against me when you first discovered Marcus. You could have destroyed us immediately. I could have. Why didn't you? I met his eyes. Because I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. His brow tightened. I wanted the truth. He looked genuinely puzzled. You still believe truth matters more than victory? Yes. And after everything? Especially after everything. For several seconds, Leonard simply stared. Then he shook his head slowly. I spent 40 years believing people always chose profit. And now, I built my life around the wrong assumption. He reached into the small stack of approved personal papers beside him. I brought something. The guard inspected it before passing it through. A worn notebook. Different from the one recovered during the investigation. This one contained sketches, landscape studies, portrait exercises, student assignments. Every page dated decades earlier. Before the fraud. Before the shell companies. Before the counterfeit empire. I used to paint, Leonard said quietly. You were talented. I loved it. What happened? He smiled without happiness. I discovered that collectors paid more for certainty than beauty. So you stopped being an artist. I became a businessman pretending to be a conservator. His fingers rested on the notebook. I kept this because I couldn't throw away the last evidence that I had once loved the work. I closed the notebook gently. You didn't lose your career first. You lost yourself. His eyes lowered. For the first time, he did not argue. When I left the prison, the rain had stopped. Clouds drifted apart, revealing a pale blue sky. Daniel was waiting beside his car. How was it? Quiet. Do you feel better? I considered the question carefully. No. He looked surprised. I feel finished. There was an important difference. Closure wasn't happiness. It was the absence of unfinished weight. Several weeks later, the National Museum Association held its annual conference. For the first time, the keynote speaker wasn't a famous collector or a wealthy donor. It was a panel of conservators, archivists, forensic specialists, the people who actually protected history. I almost declined the invitation. Ethan convinced me otherwise. They don't need a hero, he said. They need someone who remembers. So I accepted. The auditorium held more than 1,000 people. Young restoration students filled the front rows. Veteran museum directors sat behind them. Some faces were familiar. Some had once doubted me. Others had quietly supported me from the beginning. None of that mattered now. I walked to the podium. The applause faded. I looked across the room before speaking. When people asked what saved the museums, I realized they were asking the wrong question. The audience became still. No single person saved anything. Evidence did. Accountability did. And ordinary people who refused to look away did. I paused. There will always be people who believe integrity is naive. There will always be people who think silence means surrender. A few heads nodded. I learned something different. Silence can also be confidence. If the truth is real, it doesn't need panic. It only needs time. The room remained completely silent. Not because they disagreed, because they were listening. I stepped away from the podium. No dramatic ending. No triumphant declaration. Nothing more needed to be said. That evening, I walked through the museum district alone. Lights glowed warmly behind restored windows. Families laughed. Students sketched sculptures in quiet galleries. History continued exactly as it should, not as a possession, but as a trust passed carefully from one generation to the next. I stopped in front of a small exhibition featuring conservation tools from different eras. Behind one glass panel rested an old brass identification badge. Employee number 014. No photograph. No biography. Only a simple inscription. He signed without a word. The truth spoke for him. I smiled. Not because my name had been remembered, because the lesson had. Everyone thought I'd stay. Instead, I walked away. I signed without a word. And in the end, I never buried anyone. The truth did.